I always thought I had everything figured out. At 47, my life had fallen into a quiet, predictable rhythm: a long, comfortable marriage, a tidy house, the same routines that had defined my days for years. But something about that comfort had begun to feel stifling, like a thick blanket wrapped too tightly around me. I had ignored it for the most part, telling myself that stability was enough, that passion and excitement were things for younger women. And then Ethan arrived, my nephew, my sister's son. He was 22, fresh out of college, staying with us for the summer while he figured out his next steps. I hadn't seen him in years, not since he was a lanky teenager with an awkward smile. But the man who walked through my front door was different: taller, broader, more self-assured. His voice had deepened, and his laughter carried a confidence that made my stomach twist. Unexpectedly, the house felt different with him in it. He moved through it easily, bringing a new energy I hadn't realized I missed. My husband barely noticed him, too caught up in his work and his usual distractions. But I noticed. I noticed everything. One evening, after a long day, Ethan collapsed onto the couch beside me with a groan. He rolled his shoulders, rubbing the back of his neck with a wince. "I think I pulled something," he muttered. I chuckled. "Already falling apart? You're too young for that." He smirked, stretching his arms over his head, the muscles of his shoulders flexing under his t-shirt. "Guess I'm not as invincible as I thought." Without thinking, I reached out, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You need to loosen up. Here, let me." He hesitated only for a second before nodding and turning his back to me. I shifted closer, placing my hands gently on his shoulders, feeling the tension beneath my fingers. His skin was warm, firm, his breath steady but slow. "You're really tense," I murmured as I pressed my thumbs into the knots along his shoulder blades. He exhaled a low sigh, his head tilting slightly forward. "Oh, wow," he mumbled. "That feels amazing." I smiled to myself. "Told you. Magic hands." The moment should have felt ordinary, simple, but something about it wasn't. The weight of my hands on his body, the way he leaned into my touch, it made my pulse quicken. I swallowed hard, shaking off the strange sensation creeping over me. This was Ethan, my nephew. I had no reason to feel anything other than casual affection. But then he shifted, just slightly, just enough, and I felt it: a tension, a response. My hands stilled for the briefest moment before I forced myself to continue. I told myself I was imagining it, that my own body was betraying me, reading into something that wasn't there. But when I glanced down at him, I saw the way his fingers curled against his knees, the way his jaw tensed, his breath slightly uneven. Neither of us spoke, neither of us moved. The air between us had changed, and I wasn't sure if I could ignore it. I should have pulled away then, laughed it off, teased him, put distance between us. But I didn't. I stayed there, my fingers still resting against his back, my own breath shaky. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted, and there was no going back. The moment lingered between us, heavy and charged. My hands remained on his shoulders, my fingers barely moving. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, a steady drum against his skin, the warmth of him beneath my touch, the way he exhaled so slowly. It was as if neither of us dared to move, afraid of what would happen next. And then Ethan shifted just slightly, but enough. I pulled my hands away quickly, as if burned, forcing a small laugh. "I think that's enough for tonight," I murmured, my voice too thin, too unsteady. I needed distance. I needed to clear my head. Ethan turned slightly, just enough for our eyes to meet. There was something there, something unspoken, something dangerous. My throat tightened. He didn't look away. His gaze searched mine, like he was trying to find an answer to a question he wasn't brave enough to ask. I stood abruptly. "I should check on your uncle," I said, though I had no intention of doing so. I needed an escape. Without waiting for a response, I hurried down the hall, my breath coming in shallow bursts. My skin felt too hot, my thoughts too tangled. I closed the bedroom door behind me and leaned against it, pressing my palms against the wood. What was wrong with me? This was Ethan, my nephew, a boy I had known since he was a child. And yet, my body's betrayal, the way my heart had raced, I couldn't ignore it. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the moment again and again, the warmth of his skin, the tension in the air, the unspoken possibilities. The next morning, I tried to act as though nothing had happened. I went about my routine, made breakfast, and avoided looking in Ethan's direction for too long. My husband left early for work, leaving just the two of us in the house. Ethan entered the kitchen as I was finishing my coffee. His hair was tousled, his t-shirt clinging to his frame. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, turning away to rinse my mug. I needed to keep moving, to keep my hands busy, to pretend that nothing was different. But then he stepped closer, too close. "Auntie," he murmured, his voice softer now, cautious. I swallowed hard but didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I did, I wasn't sure what I would see in his eyes, or worse, what he would see in mine. "I should go into town today," I said quickly, forcing normalcy into my tone. "We're low on a few things. Let me come with you." I hesitated, but nodding felt easier than arguing. Maybe some fresh air would clear my mind. The drive was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. The tension from the night before still lingered, but neither of us acknowledged it. I told myself that was for the best. We stopped at the grocery store, made small talk, and for a moment, things felt normal again, just an aunt and her nephew running errands. But when we returned home, something changed. Ethan followed me inside, setting the bags down on the counter. As I reached up to put something away, I felt him step behind me, his presence warm and solid, too close again. I turned slowly, my breath catching. His eyes were dark, searching. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came. Instead, he hesitated, then lifted his hand slowly, brushing his fingers over my wrist. It was the lightest of touches, but it set fire to something inside me. I should have pulled away. I should have laughed, shrugged it off, done anything to break the moment. But I didn't. I stayed still, frozen in place, as if time had stopped. His fingers moved up, tracing my forearm, slow and uncertain. My breath hitched. My skin burned under his touch. And then, as if realizing what he was doing, Ethan pulled back abruptly, shoving his hands into his pockets. He started, but he didn't finish. His jaw clenched, and he turned away, shaking his head. I exhaled, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. "This can't happen," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "I know," he said, his voice strained. "I know." But there was no but. There couldn't be. He took a step back, giving me space, but the weight of what had almost happened settled thick between us. For the next few days, we avoided each other's short conversations, polite smiles, but nothing more. Then, one morning, I woke to find a note on the kitchen table. "I think I should go home early. Thanks for everything. I'll call you soon." My heart sank. I read the words over and over, my fingers tightening around the paper. I knew it was for the best. I also knew that no matter how much I tried, I would never forget the moment when everything changed.